You know that guy who suddenly disappears? Or the one who seems super confident but actually has a fragile ego? The thing is, there are patterns in male behavior that many women don't immediately notice, but can say a lot about the future of a relationship. Today, I'm going to reveal 7 weaknesses that every man has. And if you don't know how to handle them, they can become a real problem. Number 5, in particular, that one has already destroyed many relationships. Weakness number 1, the fear of failure and rejection girl. Have you ever noticed how some men freeze up when it's time to take the next step in a relationship? They might look confident on the outside, but deep down, many are terrified of failing. Whether it's at work, in life, or in love, the idea of hearing a no can be scary for them. That's why they sometimes shut down or even pretend they're not interested, when in reality, they're just insecure. And this fear doesn't just show up in relationships, you know? Ever noticed how some guys disappear instead of facing a tough conversation? For them, rejection can feel like proof that they're not good enough. What makes it even trickier is that this insecurity isn't always obvious. Some men hide it behind arrogance, jokes, or a distant attitude, as if nothing ever bothers them. When a man feels this way, he might end up stalling in the relationship. Maybe he takes forever to commit to something serious, or avoids talking about the future because he's afraid of messing up. But in the end, this fear can push away the very person he wants to keep close. And we all know how frustrating that can be, right? You feel like you're investing in something that never moves forward because he's always hitting the brakes. The most ironic part? Sometimes he doesn't even realize that this fear is holding him back. He might act like he's in control of everything, but deep down, his insecurity is screaming. And this isn't the only thing that can complicate a relationship. There's another male behavior that can be even harder to deal with. Weakness. Seduce. The struggle to express emotions. Have you ever been with a man who seemed completely incapable of talking about his feelings? He might really like you, but when it comes to showing it, he shuts down or sends mixed signals. Many men grew up hearing that showing emotion is a weakness, so they learned to hide everything. The problem? This emotional barrier can create a huge gap between you two and leave the relationship full of doubts. That doesn't mean he doesn't feel anything, okay? The issue is that he never learned how to put his emotions into words. Instead of saying, "I need you," he might act distant. When he's hurt, he disappears instead of talking about it. And without realizing it, he gives off the wrong impression, that he doesn't care, when in reality, he just doesn't know how to deal with what he's feeling. And that's when the guessing game begins. You start analyzing messages, mood, changes, and tiny gestures, trying to figure out what's going on. But is it really worth spending all your time decoding signals? Because at the end of the day, a relationship needs communication. And if he can't open up, it's hard to build a real connection. The craziest part? A lot of times this isn't just about pride or stubbornness. There's a deeper reason behind this emotional shutdown, and it can affect not only the relationship, but also his self-esteem and the choices he makes in life. Weakness. There are 3. The constant need for validation girl. Have you ever noticed how some men seem to need a trophy every time they do something right? For them, self-worth depends on other people's approval, whether it's through compliments, status, or achievements. At first, it might even seem charming. He does everything to impress you, enjoys showing off a little. But over time, this constant need for validation can become exhausting. And the worst part? It's not always obvious. He might exaggerate his success stories, constantly compare himself to others, or even get jealous when he's not the center of attention. And you know what happens? If he feels like he's not being admired enough, he might start seeking that validation elsewhere, which can seriously affect the relationship. On top of that, this insecurity makes him afraid of failure. He doesn't trust his own worth and needs constant reminders from others that he's amazing. This can lead him to make decisions based on what people think instead of what he truly wants. And let's be real, living for other people's opinions is not the best foundation for a healthy relationship, right? The most interesting part is that this need for recognition is often connected to something even deeper. There's another weakness that can make him completely shut down when he feels questioned, and when that happens, Even the simplest conversation can turn into a minefield. Weakness. Number 4. The inability to handle. Criticism. Have you ever tried to gently point something out to a man only for him to react as if it were a personal attack? For many men, any kind of criticism, even constructive, feels like a threat to their identity. Instead of reflecting on it, they get defensive, justify themselves, or even change the subject. Because to them, admitting a mistake is the same as admitting they're not good enough. And that can be incredibly frustrating. Suddenly, a simple conversation turns into an exhausting argument because he just can't accept that there's room for improvement. It's like everything has to be his way, and any comment makes him shut down or go on the defensive. In the end, nobody really listens, and the problems just pile up. What makes it worse is that when he can't handle criticism, he also avoids taking responsibility for his mistakes. Instead of acknowledging when something is wrong, he looks for someone to blame or comes up with excuses. And in a relationship, that means small issues never get resolved. They just keep building up. And we all know how frustrating it is to feel like our opinions and feelings aren't being taken seriously. But this resistance to criticism doesn't come out of nowhere. There's a deeper reason behind it, something rooted in the way many men were raised. And this weakness might be the very reason why they avoid asking for help, even when they need it the most. Weakness. Number 5, pride and the reluctance to ask for help. Girl, have you ever noticed how some men seem allergic to asking for help? For many of them, admitting they need support feels almost like admitting weakness. They were taught to be self-sufficient, to solve everything on their own, and to never show vulnerability. It might look like a display of strength, but in reality, it's a heavy burden they carry alone, and it ends up pushing away the people who care about them. You know that moment when he insists on handling something by himself, even when it's painfully obvious that he needs help? Whether it's ignoring a relationship issue or refusing advice, he would rather take the hardest route than admit he doesn't have all the answers. And this not only holds him back from growing, but also wears down the relationship. Because while he pretends everything is fine, you feel like you're navigating things alone. When challenges arise, he shuts down instead of working through them together. If something is bothering him, he doesn't talk about it. He expects you to guess. And this lack of openness makes any relationship difficult because we all know that communication and mutual support are essential for overcoming obstacles. But the interesting thing is that behind this stubbornness, there's an even bigger fear. This fear makes him hesitate when it comes to taking important steps in his love life, like he's always running from something inevitable. And speaking of fear, weakness. 6. The fear of losing freedom. Some men see relationships as a threat to their freedom. To them, being in a committed relationship means giving up choices, free time, and even a part of their identity. This flawed perspective makes them avoid emotional involvement, even when they genuinely care about the person they're with. And that's when the cycle of confusion and frustration begins. Have you ever dated someone who seemed super into you, but always pulled back when things started getting serious? He shows affection. You have amazing moments together, but when it comes to discussing commitment, he suddenly finds a way to dodge the conversation. His fear of losing independence makes him avoid any situation that feels like it requires deeper involvement, and often he doesn't even realize he's sabotaging his own happiness. This behavior can show up in different ways. Some avoid labels, some always have an excuse to not make future plans, and others start nitpicking their partner just to justify distancing themselves. All because, deep down, they associate commitment with losing control over their own lives. What they fail to understand is that a healthy relationship isn't a prison. It's a partnership built on respect and freedom for both people. But you know what's even more fascinating? There's an even deeper insecurity that fuels this fear of commitment, one that doesn't just affect relationships, but also the way he navigates life as a whole. And often, this fragility disguises itself as strength, creating a barrier that's hard to break through. Before we move on, a quick message for you. Do you know there's a secret that only 1 in 1,000 women knows? It's something that makes any man devote himself to you, body and soul, without even understanding why. This information is so rare that very few people, have access to it. If you're ready to discover something that can completely change the way you approach relationships, I've left an exclusive video in the comments, but watch it quickly. It might not be available for long. Weakness number 7, insecurity. About masculinity. From a young age, many men are taught that they must be strong, confident, and in control at all times. Show doubt or vulnerability? Not an option. To them, that would be a flaw. The problem is this: constant pressure to prove they're man enough creates an emotional armor that's hard to take off, affecting not only relationships, but also their self-esteem. Have you ever noticed how some men avoid anything that might make them look weak? They overcompensate with excessive confidence, try to be overly dominant, or even dismiss other people's feelings just to appear stronger. But the truth? It all stems from insecurity. They're constantly worried about how they're perceived, and instead of forming real connections, they just keep up an image. This can lead to impulsive behaviors, like the constant need to compete, prove they're superior, or even put their partner down just to feel better about themselves. In relationships, this might show up as extreme jealousy, resistance to open conversations, or an inability to express emotions. Because in their minds, being vulnerable feels dangerous, when, in reality, it's what actually makes someone truly secure. The most ironic part? This obsession with appearing strong is exactly what weakens them. A truly secure man doesn't need a mask. At the end of the day, it's not about looking strong. It's about having the maturity to build real and meaningful connections. And that, my friend, is the difference between someone who just pretends to be confident and someone who truly is. Now that you're aware of these male weaknesses, the big question is, how do you deal with them without burning yourself out? The key is understanding that no one is perfect. Not them, not us. The goal isn't to change a man, but to observe whether he has the maturity to recognize his limitations and grow. A partner who is willing to evolve with you makes all the difference in a healthy relationship. The most important thing is to keep your own boundaries and expectations clear. If you constantly feel frustrated, ignored, or undervalued, maybe it's time to ask yourself if this relationship is truly fulfilling for you. An emotionally mature man can have insecurities, but he won't use them as an excuse to hurt you. And remember, you shouldn't have to teach a man how to treat you well. He should want to learn. And if you want to keep learning more about male behavior and how to build lighter, happier relationships, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about love, self-esteem, and smart relationship choices. So click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos.